So yeah, this is interactive. So you will be required to
Ooh.
answer some things. Um, so for those on the computer, don't worry. If you've got your phones by you, there'll be a QR code. For those who are on their phones, in the chat, there's the Slido number to log into. It will come active when the slide comes up. It's all integrated to PowerPoint fantastically. So hopefully you'll be able to join the fun. Um, I'm Robin. My background is primarily when I first started working, I was a Royal Navy engineer officer. I served for 18 years on various ships as a engineering manager, but then moved into the fleet headquarters and became the fleet safety officer for 3 years. Um, that opened up a sort of new way of thinking for me, slightly different from engineering to safety. Um, and then retiring from the Navy, I started working in the offshore wind sector. Good mix of the engineering safety management. Um, but I was getting a bit frustrated with the safety world, and in my gut feeling, thought this isn't working for me. Um, and I fortunately came across a few other, what I didn't call them system thinkers, but people who had been system thinking trained. And that led me into SCiO, and I've been a member for SCiO for about 5 or 6 years now, and I've recently finished the apprenticeship. Um, so that's given me now the understanding of why I was unhappy and frustrated with safety in its normal sense. And this is, I suppose, the culmination now, the point at which I've reached so far in my understanding of why safety, I think, is breaking the laws. And you'll get the opportunity to either agree or disagree with me. Go on, let's move on. So I need to know. Oh, got 1 minute. Yep, people have already started. What's your level of systems laws? And for those who don't know it, if you can see that, Patrick's book. Um, I'm going to be quoting from that later. Patrick's beer fund is going up. I think that's a fair representation. Okay, so about 20% know nothing. Third, uh, use don't know about them but don't use in practice, and then nearly 50% are good understanding. There we are. Okay, that's a good reach. Next question. So that's systems laws. What about safety management and safety laws? Okay, that's quite pleasing. People, about half have had some exposure to risk assessment or training or some sort of safety management activity. And there's a few who know nothing about it. So I will try to cater to the audience. So this is it. The Health and Safety Executive, as the UK's regulatory authority for health and safety, basically everything about health and safety law and practice is about risk assessment and risk management. And that's all you need to know about risk management. You identify hazards, assess it, control it, record your findings, review. Very systematic in its approach. And that's also echoed by the ISO 45001 standard, which says pretty much the same thing. Um, and it highlights in a systematic way. So it's very linear in its approach, very procedural, and therefore rigid. But it's the legal requirement. This is the requirements of the typical management system standard. So that's the background. That's the sort of focus. This is where safety practice focuses its effort in risk management. The output of that is generally then a risk register where you identify the hazards, you list them out, you assess them, you put in place some controls, you monitor it, and then you do it for every single hazard you can think of. Now, for a typical company, let's say an office-based company, you're stretching it. If you get 50 hazards in the list in the register, that's probably doing pretty well. If you're in higher hazard activities, construction, you're probably looking at 200 or 300. If you're in something like a very high hazard industry like nuclear or offshore oil and gas, you're probably looking at a different regime altogether because there's too many put in a list. You'll have a safety case, but it's the same thing still. You're trying to identify all the things that can go wrong and put in place something to prevent that happening or minimize the impact when it does happen. And the basic tool they use is this matrix. This is a 5 by 5, and it's a measure of the combination of probability and impact, or likelihood and severity. And there's a whole different way for each company. Some companies will use a 3 by 3, a 3 by 4, a 4 by 4, 5 by 4, 5 by 5. I know I've worked with BP. They use an 8 by 8 matrix because their oil and gas is much more high hazard industry. But this is the tool that is the core to all safety management activity. So that's it. Remember this, risk registers. We're going to get onto that. So systems laws versus risk registers. This is where we have to challenge the way that safety operates. Let's start with Connor Ashby. So for those who have read Grammar of Systems, I'm reading directly from Patrick's words. A regulator means anything or anyone that is trying to guide, control, or direct a system. In those terms, every manager or anyone trying to affect a system is a regulator. A model is a simplification that holds the key elements, relationships, and dynamics of the system and ignores a lot of extraneous detail. Failure to build, check, and maintain adequate models means that you are likely to act at random. The opposite of Connor Ashby is March Olson's trash can decision-making. With no model or inadequate models, you will intervene at random and the results will be random. So, the risk register, it's a poor model. And I'll explain that in comparison with the other rules. It's, as I said, for a business, a small office-based business, 50 hazards you've identified. That's your scope of defining the boundaries of what makes you safe. So with a poor risk register, your safety interventions are going to follow that March Olson trash can rule, and they're going to be random with poor results. So first, systems law demonstrates that risk registers are not good regulators. Second, systems law, the key one, the father of all laws, one could say. Control achievable by a given regulatory subsystem over a given system is limited by, 1, the variety of the regulator, and 2, the channel capacity between the regulator and the system. One of the implications is that there are inherent imbalances in variety between a system's environment, the organizational system itself, and the management of that system, since the variety of the environment is theoretically infinite. So risk registers have an extremely limited variety. You can count the number of hazards on your hands compared to the realities of an environment. All the possible states of a system in a workplace is infinite, but the risk register can't cope with it. It doesn't have the channel capacity to cope with it, or the variety. So fairly poor model, fairly poor variety destroyer. Darkness principle. In systems practice, systems are also ultimately unknowable for 3 reasons. Firstly, because of their fractality. If you try to reduce them to parts, then as you go down levels from system to subsystem, Secondly, in parallel, the number of interdependencies increase, and in many cases exponentially. And thirdly, possible, most critically, systems are by their nature dynamic and change as you observe them. At this point, some people throw up their hands with a, so if it's unknowable, what's the point? The implications of the darkness principle is that since systems cannot be completely known, you have to abandon belief that it is knowable, be aware that our knowledge is always bounded and never certain, get comfortable with uncertainty, use simplified representation of the system, aka a model, to understand it, choose carefully which aspects of the system to model and which to ignore, and work holistically, use the system's emergent properties to understand it. A risk register draws that boundary around the credible and foreseeable. They only have that limited set of variety and channel capacity. It can't take in the fact that the environment is so vast and the variety is almost unknowable, that a risk register deliberately blinkers what it's going to actually try to manage and control. And there's a lot of people who believe that once they draw that boundary around what is credible and foreseeable, nothing else can happen. They are therefore safe. And they believe they are managing all possible hazards and risks in a given situation. This is really important for me. You know, the darkness principle is so important to understanding. Risk registers do not have that capacity to deal with all the unforeseeable, all the possible states of a system. And finally, probably one of my favorite ones is Adam's third law, because we don't know what his first and second was. The first one was don't bite the apple, I believe, but different Adam maybe. The lowest risk components are low risk because they've been optimized for internal reliability. That means they haven't been optimized for their systemic contents. If you have an organization that relies on just pursuing low risk options, then by definition, these have to be long-term stable relationships. Such relationships are always vulnerable to being suddenly destabilized by changes outside the relationship. Many attempts to minimize risk carry with them the threat of higher levels of risk. The implications of this is that you need to choose and are able to choose the types of risk you want to engage with, but you can't eliminate risk. The focus needs to be on balancing the risk appetite for the overall system against the ability of each subsystem to compromise for the good of the whole. And again, the risk registers isolate risks. They list them out in a table. They ignore the interdependencies. There's no interconnection between the events or possible situations you face in reality. And they're based on a long-term annual review cycle. There's no short-term dynamics considered. So they have this weakness. So if you take all of those laws, those four laws, and look at how risk registers, which is the core fundamental tool used in safety management, risk registers just ignore the rules. They don't know the system's laws, and therefore they are an incredibly inappropriate tool to try to model and manage and control a very complex situation, which is a workplace. So that's my argument. This is then backed up by the fact that it's recognized risk management, safety management is failing. And that's resulted in the spawning, you could say emergence, or I'd say spawning of safety fads. There's a whole bunch of things. So this is what I call a jigsaw puzzle of safety management. There's people with their favorite pieces they want to play each time, their own particular focus, because they've gone, oh, safety doesn't work, let's do something differently. And I think some of these things are important to pull out. The one which really gets me is zero harm. This is again, the belief this is, the darkness principle, and Adam's third law kicking in, where people believe they can achieve zero harm, no workplace accidents, nobody gets hurt. You cannot believe in zero harm if you understand the darkness principle and Adam's third law. You cannot list every possible hazard, and control it. It just doesn't work. There's some other attempts at going a bit more into the sort of softer boundaries, so psychological safety, safety differently, behavior-based safety, just culture. These are all trying to push at the boundary of the rigid systematic approach of risk management. So these are all the things that you might come across. You might hear safety to zero harm, just cultures. But for me, they're all fads because they're still bounded by the systematic approaches. And they're all focused on an occupational environment. So back to SCiO. That's my prosecution of the system laws being broken by occupational safety. There is no defense as far as I can present it. You are now the jury. You have to decide, is occupational safety breaking systems laws? A few more seconds. At least there's no no's. I'm happy there's undecided because I've got further evidence. Right, we'll leave it at that. 50-50. Okay, interesting. Come on, where's my pointer? So if we say 50% of you, half of you believe that it is breaking systems laws, how do you know who's affected? Well, again, we come back to the HSE and they say, if you've got a company with more than 5 employees, you must have a policy and it says you must do risk assessment. So we've talked about that. Risk assessment is very limited in variety management, and boundary definition of what's included from the environment. So if you've seen that on your workplace notice board, your company will be having a policy, safety policy, and you will be doing risk assessments, and you will have a whole organization deliberately breaking systems laws. And you are in an organization which is not safe by definition because it cannot possibly recognize all of the hazards and control all of the risks. So how do we then say, well, it's no good just saying it doesn't work or it's not good enough? How can we use systems laws in a safety environment to actually do something differently, do something better, or at least understand where systems laws fit into occupational safety? So if we reframe risk management, and I'm taking the financial definition from Warren Buffett here, risk is not knowing what you're doing. So I've taken the Stacey matrix, you may be familiar with. I've abused it and reframed it to risk is we don't know what to do, and incompetence is we don't know how to do it. So if you start down in the bottom corner, simple things. We know what to do, we know how to do it. This is simple. That's straightforward. If we move into the complicated zone, this is where we start thinking, oh, it's a bit higher risk and we're not quite sure how to do it. This is actually where occupational safety sits. So this is where we can use risk management to a limited extent for some simpler situations, maybe a little bit complicated. And we put in place informations, instruction, training, supervision, risk assessments, method statements, etc. And we are legally compliant to the things we need to do. So that's actually quite a good zone for recognizing the boundaries of the risk registers. we can start to actually use a risk register, and they can be effective. And to a limited extent, they are. If you then go into the complex zone, this is systems thinking territory. This is where it gets dynamic, uncertain, and ambiguous. You've got the interconnections, you've got multiple factors, multiple stakeholders, and there is no immediate solution. So this is our stamping ground. This is where we thrive. And if you go, I really don't know what to do and I really don't know how to do it, you shouldn't be there. As a risk manager, as a safety manager, I wouldn't want to be in a situation where I'm in an anarchic place. But they do exist. But if we now use this model to understand where the system's laws can come in, we're looking at the boundary here between the complicated safety management, risk management, and the systems thinking area. But we can also recognize this boundary. Let's start here with a simple. If we go from the complicated into the simple, so let's say we go nanny state. Let's say a company tells you if you're walking down the stairs, you have to hold the handrail. Yeah, walking down the stairs is something we do outside the workplace. We should be able to walk down the stairs in most normal situations without needing to hold the handrail. It is there, it can be useful, but it shouldn't be made a rule. So this is where safety gets its bad reputation by forcing its complicated processes into simple situations. Likewise, a lot of occupational activity is actually in the complex environment. But because safety practitioners don't have systems thinking practice knowledge, they try to force their complicated procedures into the complex environment. And this is where it fails, and it fails big time and most spectacularly, because we're talking about organizational failure, not just at an individual level. So I think this, using this bastardized version of the Stacey matrix to say this is where occupational safety management actually fits in the complicated zone, but actually a lot of the activities are in a complex. So that's the sort of setting framework for then how do we use systems laws, systems rules in the occupational setting. So got to think a bit differently. So we need safer interventions. Let's start with the S, systemic. Let's use the systems rules to model the situations, the complex situations we're faced with. Let's have them agreed by decision makers, duty holders, and power holders, because there's no point in trying to do something unless you have that top level management commitment to actually make it happen. It's got to be financially proportionate. So you have the value exchange. You don't want to just say it's for safety, we must spend money. It's got to have a cost benefit analysis. And there are things for calculating the implied cost of averting a fatality. So we've got to put the money in there somewhere. Emotionally motivating for those who have to make it happen. There's no point having a great plan if the people who actually have to implement the plan don't want to do it. Getting the engagement at the right place by the right people is absolutely critical to success. And resilient. So whatever intervention you design has to fit the changing environment, because the environment will change. It is dynamic. So there's the 5 elements which make up safer interventions. With a rule that any systems thinking technique can be used to do that systemic assessment, the systemic design. But keeping in mind, I like to use Meadows' 12 leverage points to be the points of design in the intervention. The other thing is to recognize, effectiveness, SSM kicks in here. We've got some effectiveness, efficiency, and efficacy, I think. I can happily be challenged on that, but I think this is a useful check to make sure that we're doing the right sort of systemic intervention. Leverage points, as a reminder, there's a 12 in reverse order. Numbers, and number 12 is the least effective, and transcending paradigms, number 1 is the most effective. So safety as is, oh, a bit of CSH there. Safety as is focused around those worst 3 effectively. And it's, looking at accident statistics, looking at activity reports, monthly reporting, quarterly reporting. It's all about numbers. It's really not very effective. Ought to be, if you want to be a high-performing safety organization, you want to be looking at the sort of 6 to 2 elements, and that's much more effective. But the rule for me is, if I've found out doing this, whichever interventions you design have to be higher than the intervention, the leverage point, which is actually driving the system. So if you're in reinforcing feedback loops, it's no point trying to control it by numbers, your accident stats or your activity reports, because that's too low. The reinforcing feedback loop is going to be driving. So you need something up here to actually counter the reinforcing feedback loop. So that's how I've used Meadows. I'll talk about numbers. This is from a current client I'm working with. This is their requirement for their contractors, subcontractors, monthly reporting. And it's all just numbers. This is leverage point number 12. It's really ineffective. And all of the management interaction is about looking at the numbers. So I find it very frustrating that I'm in a situation. I promised myself, I said I'd never go back to doing ordinary safety management, but I find myself in a position where I'm still having to deal with this and still being frustrated with the inadequacies of systematic safety management processes. But yeah, numbers then be gamed and therefore inaccurate, unreliable, misleading, drives poor decision making, unwanted behaviors, and unintended consequences, which usually end up in people getting hurt. So again, another reason why contemporary safety fails to actually manage safety effectively. So let's go back to the safer interventions. This is a case study. This is, again, something I'm recently working on. The project is a French offshore wind farm. The client is a joint venture between the bank financing and a Spanish energy company who are developing the project. The contractor is the foundation manufacturer in Spain, and the client's reps are on site. So there's a small team of people overseeing the activity to make sure things are doing, both from quality and a safety point of view. But they are seen as a safety police in the old, hard hat and hard boots and clipboard type. The situation is 7,000 safety observations, so written observation. And again, management by Excel. There is an Excel file with 7,000 safety observations in, saying you haven't done something good enough, or you've seen that, you must make a corrective action. That's not working because the number of accidents are increasing. And that is then driving letters of concern from the client back in France to say to the Spanish shipyard, your safety is not very good, do something about it. And the shipyard's got a closed mindset, is the polite way of saying it. They really don't care. They're nationally owned, and see no point in actually doing anything other than what they want to do. So they're completely unresponsive. It is a case that it's live. This is real companies. I will say it is green. It's anonymized. So I'm quite happy. All of this is green level to go out. So that's fine. So I'm going to ask you again, get on Slido. What would you do? What tools would you use in that situation? How would you start your intervention? There's several choices on the list. I'll give you a good 30 seconds to think about it and pick one or several. I think you can have multiple choice on this one, so not just limited to one. Do a bit of splicing. Okay, that's interesting. Right. VSM, CSH, soft systems, top three. I would say that's valid choices for those who wish to pursue those avenues. Have we had any other? I thought Conan would come up somewhere. Agile, I had to put it in. Mosaic, interesting. Patterns, ethical. Okay, good. This is what I did. I just did what I suppose you call this at the start of SSD. I didn't take it any further in terms of dynamic modeling, but I started with unsafe work practices. So we were getting the 7,000 safety observations, clearly a lot of unsafe work practices. That led to an increase in client observations, increase in on-site interventions, which led to more confrontation, which actually, because of the uncooperative contractor, less improvement actions and therefore more unsafe work practices. So we had this administrative burden of managing safety observations rather than actual safe practice. So we got the first reinforcing loop here. So remember, reinforcing loops in Meadows' list is number 7. Also, unsafe work practices, you're going to have more accidents, you're going to have therefore more client intervention, you're going to have more confrontation, loop goes again. So accidents were getting worse and the severity was getting worse. There's one person whilst I was early in the project, he had a crane hook swing into his face, and he's got quite severe life-changing injuries and effects to his face. So, not just a lost time injury where you go back after a week. He's probably never going to go back to work. So there's also three sort of, this is the core of the model. You can build it out. There's going to be more interactions, but the three interesting points are the shareholder expectations, the contractor safety culture, and the contractor on-site supervision. So what did I do? I used intervention number 6, communications channels. Stop trying to persuade the client, my client as well, to stop sending letters of concern to the contractor management. So we're trying to reduce the amount of confrontation and therefore give more appropriate time for improvement actions. So we're trying to reverse that reinforcing loop. Second thing was focus on life-saving rules. So this is number 5, change the rules of the game for Danilo Meadows interventions. So we're trying to reduce observations and therefore reduce intervention, reduce confrontation. Again, so we're trying to reverse the reinforcing feedback loop there. So those are the two things that we as the organization, the client, could do directly, but indirectly, then that gave space to the contractor to say, actually, we've got less admin load to do because there's less interventions and hopefully less accidents. We can get out on site more and do our own supervision of the unsafe work practices. So this is almost this is a self-control, self-organization. So here we've got 3 effective points of intervention to try and counter those reinforcing feedback loops around unsafe work practices. So that's how I designed it. How did it actually come about as a safer intervention? Well, it was systemic. I presented it to client management to say, this is what I'd like to do. I then went with the safety director to the Spanish shipyard, presented it to the contractor management, and they said, oh, that's different. That looks like it could work. It's going to be better for us. Costs nothing because it's It's just a mindset change. It's not introducing equipment. It's not introducing a new something rather. It's not more people. And actually the potential to reduce incurred costs. Emotionally motivating because everybody was happy that the confrontation was being reduced. And the on-site client reps felt actually valued because they were going out now and they were focused on life-saving rules. So this is the things which are actually going to kill you, working at height. So if they saw somebody at risk of falling because they weren't connected with a harness or the barriers weren't in place, they could actually step in and do something useful rather than go around with a clipboard and filling in an Excel file and being in the office half the day. And resilient because the existing processes for reporting were there. So you stabilize the environment, less reporting, but more effective. And again, the life-saving rules are a common approach to take, regardless of individual subcontractor safety management system, processes, procedures, rules themselves. So there was an overall very easy approach to take. What happened? Well, after 2 months, the client management said, "Oh, this is working. We can look at something else now. Some other issues, perhaps not safety, to spend their time talking about at management meetings." But they never acknowledged that they had a critical role in creating the situation in the first place in terms of sending letters of concern every month. I said the client reps reduced stress, more productive, better relationship, contractor team. They did start to self-organize and self-control the on-site activities because they had more time to get out on site. So it's just say that performance isn't always about accident stats. So how do we now measure intervention performance? I'm going to take Beer and his equation. We're going to say, actually, the number of successful safer interventions divided by the attempted. So you need to be able to recognize the complex situations that you think you can intervene in and design a safer intervention. Not all will work, but you can attempt them. So you've now got a measure of performance, which is about the output of the safety organization itself in doing effectively change management through safer interventions. And that's Meadows' third leverage point, changing the goal of the system. So this is that reframing safety using systems laws and systems practice in order to actually really have an effective leverage point. Instead of trying to control by numbers at number 12, we're now trying to change the goals of what safety actually is at leverage point number 3. Can we go up one? Leverage point number 2, the paradigm shift. Well, we talk about workplace safety. You're at work in a year, just over 2,000 hours per year. Safety, which is the individual's own capability to protect themselves and the people around them, that's active the whole of your waking time. So that's nearly over 6,000 hours per year. So the ability to look after yourself rather than be controlled in a workplace has 3 times more effect through your everyday activities. Why is that important? Well, if we take the HSC stats, on average, and this is fairly stable for the last 5 years, about 130 people in the UK are killed at work through workplace accidents. I should have done a Slido again here for people guessing how many there are in the UK from accidents outside the workplace. That's 23,000 fatalities per year. That's 180 times more outside the workplace than at work. So you are far, far, far more likely to be killed outside doing something you normally do, like cleaning the gutters, doing some gardening, using a lawnmower, driving a car, taking the kids to the park. Accidents happen far, far more. Fatalities, 23,000 fatalities. If you want just hospitalizations, it's 900,000 people a year. Now, I will categorize this is a different cohort. That is the UK population. as opposed to the working population. But you can see, even taking the apples and pears, there's a huge discrepancy between workplace fatalities and accidental fatalities outside the workplace. So we've been looking at the wrong things. Our focus has not been on what's going to kill us. It's you're perfectly safe for the most part at work. It's when you're not at work that the accidents are going to happen and you will be killed or hospitalized. How do we then take use of systemic models? And in this case, the OODA loop, John Boyd's OODA loop. He was a fighter pilot. He used it to destabilize his opponents, to try and break up their decision cycle and disrupt it, and therefore be better to shoot them down. He's I think it was Korean War, Vietnam War, was it late 60s, early 70s. So he was trying to destabilize the enemy. But what if the enemy is ourself? We are destabilizing ourselves by not taking advantage of the OODA loop. How can we do that? Well, neuroscience in the last 20 years has come on an awful lot. So we've still got the same basic model: observe, orient, decide, and act. Orient is the brain. This is how we think. We've come to realize now that only 5% of our conscious mind is driving what we do in a day, and 95% of the time we're on autopilot. How can we intervene to make the OODA loop in this new model more effective? Well, there's 8 places you can intervene. Firstly, on your physical and emotional states. So this is driving your ability to actually perceive hazards and risks. So rushing, frustration, fatigue, complacency, and under the influence, and I include drugs, alcohol, and mobile phones, because we're now talking in all environments, not just the workplace. Clearly drugs and alcohols are distractors, as are mobile phones, which affect your ability to observe your environment and what's around you. So triggering on recognizing your self states, looking at others, looking around you, triggering on hazards, situational awareness, actually understanding what it is, what a hazard is and how it can impact you, anticipation, so scanning the future, and deciding. So there's 2 decision points which are really, really critical. One's going forward and one's going back. One forward one is the feedback loop to trigger your self states. So this is your point of control over how well you see things and therefore whether you decide to act. The other one is trigger to stop. So this is, I'm in a bad place, I've got to stop, there's something I can't control anymore. That drives the good behavior and the bad behavior, and the errors increasing risk, which are then driving habits. So you can learn to change your habits. You can learn new habits, and you've got to recognize bad habits you need to try to get rid of. And also, if things go wrong or close calls, near misses, again, you learn to spot those and recognize how to adapt your sensory input, your perception of what's happening around you. So these are 8 intervention points in the OODA loop in order to make your own self awareness better. That's very complicated. For a systems thinker, they'll probably get this. For a layperson, it's a bit more difficult. So Shane Patrick's not here. He likes navigational terms for his sailing. We need a compass to navigate a ship. We need a compass to guide our morals, and we need a compass to protect ourselves. So we've given safety the compass and the 8 cardinal points around, and the heading, the head mark is trigger on your self states: the rushing, frustration, fatigue, complacency, and being under the influence. And it's key to being able to self-assess how that works. I'm just going to go through this quickly because I know time is pressing. So these are the things that we've included, what you need to learn, what you can learn in order to improve your safety compass. All of these are competencies. And I said, it's not knowing necessarily all of these all the time. It's knowing when to trigger or use a competency for the situation you're in. And that's when you learn to master self-D. So if you become a master of self-D, you are using one or multiple of these compass points at a particular situation in order to protect yourself and protect those around you. So that's what we call the self-D compass. So, final Slido question. What was your worst or most memorable accident or injury? Where was it? Was it at work, driving, at home, or other social environment? Bear in mind, we're including alcohol. Last chances for voting.
Robin, category issues. Not actually in my house, but near my home, in a garden sort of setting.
Other
Is that
social environment.
okay? Thanks.
Leave you to get that one in. There we are. There you go. We'll leave it at that. Yeah, workplace is only 15%. Driving 15%. If I put mine in, I would have to choose either at home or while driving. I've had one of each, which were fairly similar in output. Yeah, we are safer at work than we are other places. I think that's the conclusion, and that's why I think it justifies the safety approach. So why do we need to change the safety paradigm? If I get the right bit of paper. It's really important that we recognize people are safe at home because that's where they are most likely to die. It's not people dying at work. It's the home. Self-D, yeah, it's in the moment. It's real time. It's dynamic. It takes into account all of those things that can go wrong, which risk assessment in the workplace just can't do it. And a safety culture is built by people who look out for each other. It's protect yourself, protect other people. So 2 questions to ask yourself. As a manager, if you're a manager, have you ever received that call from an employee or an employee's spouse saying, sorry, they won't be coming in today because they're in hospital, or worst case, they're actually dead? Having served in the Navy, I've made the call the other way around to tell people their loved ones have died. It's a really hard thing to do as a manager. And when you leave work at the end of the day, are you still concerned about your safety or the safety of your colleagues? And the one place to go, if you'd like to know more, want to talk more, just exchange on this, the concept of either the safer interventions or self-D. That's LinkedIn. Please connect with me if you're not already. Happy to have a chat about any of those particular aspects.